Hello, friends. I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's fantastic, and I hope you'll actually tell me in the comments. I love hearing from you. The other day we were talking about like time dilation or time compression with age and all that sort of stuff. I had another thought along those lines that hit today, like moments ago, an hour ago, whatever. And that is that Kenan Thompson and I are the same age. He is also 44 years old. And that kind of blew my mind. I learned this through Neil Brennan's podcast called Blocks. If you're not aware of it, you should probably look it up. If you like talking about, like not necessarily mental health, but just life struggles and hear funny people talk about the stuff that's going on in their lives, it's worth watching. Anyway, Kenan Thompson said he was 44 years old, and I was just kind of like, what? Because, like, I absolutely love Kenan Thompson. He's one of the funniest actors I've ever seen in my life. He's hilarious. And going back to the late 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, when he was really coming up, it just seemed like he was a kid. And I forget that I was too. But at that time, I felt old. I felt older than him. Like, oh man, look at that kid. He's so fun. He's going to be awesome. But we're the same freaking age. Now, granted, on television especially, like what you're seeing was probably filmed, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, depending on the complexity. Maybe for something like Planet Earth, it might be 5 years ago or whatever. But, so what I was seeing was already outdated, but it didn't necessarily mean that I still probably, if we were the same age, I would have been like, that's a funny kid. And that's the way I thought back then, and I still kind of think that way now. Because I realized as a kid, I looked up to, like, athletes as these amazing, I guess I'm going to be a little bit sexist here, but I'm going to say these athletes were amazing men. And that's just because men's professional sports is all I really had access to at that time. And so I saw men's professional sports athletes as these heroes of mine. We're talking about in my teenage years. The realization being that those athletes were just a few years older than me. Like they weren't, men. They were still discovering the world. And as I've grown older, my perception of them has not shifted. Meaning that I'm 44 now. When a 20-something-year-old football player is on TV, I don't look at him and go, that's a kid. But he is. Like, I'm twice his age. He wasn't born when I was 20. So it's like, but I still see it, and I think that man's doing awesome. Or I think of him as a peer. Like, we're the same. Like, I could do that. I could play football. I can't. I know I can't. That's, but there's some weird age comparison thing that happens with time as well. Or maybe me looking at a 20-something football player and saying that he's like, we're the same, or we're, whatever. That's just me trying to hang on to something. We've talked quite a few times about how one of my fears is growing old and complacent and being that back in my day, and I'm not going to do that. I'm never going to be that person, but I'm also not trying to hang on to my youth. But I'm curious to know about your perceptions of other people's ages in relation to your own, like, or is that not something that you've thought about? I feel very intently, that's not what I mean, intensely, that there are some people. When I was a kid or when I was a teenager, I looked at people who were literally my age or within a year or two of my age, and on TV, in movies, whatever, and thinking, man, that kid's going to be awesome someday. Or that kid, and that's the way that I thought about them, that kid, even though I was their age. It's weird. And, me being 40-something now, that means, so my dad is 30 years older than me. He's 35 years older than me. No, 34 years older than me. So when I was a teenager, when he was 44, I would have been 9. I think that's how the math works. You know, my 44-year-old father at 9 seemed like this really old man. Like, he's just like, oh man, you know, we're going to have to put him down soon. He's old. But I look at myself now at 44, and I don't feel that way at all. I feel great. I feel, you know, just as vigorous and strong and, you know, determined as I have been the rest of my life. It's not, I don't feel like I've slowed down a whole lot. And I hope to keep that momentum. But I think, you know, in addition to that, my grandparents, when I was a child, you know, were in their late 50s, early 60s. They seemed just ancient, like just incapable. But 60-year-olds now, in general, like, you know, don't really seem that much slower than 40-somethings. So it's something that I've thought about quite a bit, especially considering that, you know, Em and I have a pretty big age gap. And there's going to be that time when I'm old, like I'm obviously old and she's not. And that bothers me a little bit, tiny bit. But I don't look at her and think that kid, even though she's, you know, 17 years my junior. Partially because of her maturity. And maybe that's the thing with, you know, the athletes. Like, there's some perception of maturity, even though I know, even though immaturity is rampant in professional sports, I look at that person and go, wow, that's a really put together person. Especially when they put on their suits and they have their press conferences and stuff. It's like, that's a really, man, that guy is, you know, seen it. He hasn't. He's just pretending like the rest of us. Yeah. So, anyway, we have softball again tonight. We had softball last night, softball again tonight. Have to drive about an hour away to see this game. Should be interesting. What do you got going on? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know sounds smart is quisling. It is a noun meaning a traitor, a person who conspires with the enemy. The leader of Norway's national unity movement was executed for being a quisling in 1945. Quisling, Q-U-I-S-L-I-N-G. It's interesting. That is definitely a brand new word to me. Don't know that I would ever use it. Definitely don't think I've ever heard it.